Okay, hello everyone. Today we're working on Wordsworth's poem, The Prelude. So you've probably already got that title down. And our learning objective is to explain the metaphor, I unloosed her chain, and the confidence and control felt by the speaker in this poem. So maybe some of that already makes sense to you from reading it, but we will be going into that a bit more detail now. So get that written down, but also let's just slowly scroll down on some of our versatile vocabulary. We've got a couple of great pieces to start off with today that were new, submissive and harmonious, and you might think about how those apply to this poem, but also thinking back to earlier parts of this term, we've got some other brilliant words that could be used, such as secure, tangible, constant, benevolent, and more recently, yearning. All of those things, I reckon, could be included in what we've got to say. So, as you all know, our story starts off with the young Wordsworth down by the lake, finding a little boat, taking it out on the water, even though no one's told him he can do that. So we're starting off with this scene here of the boat chained up to the tree. And every part of this poem is charged with a kind of excitement and enthusiasm about this experience, even though it might be relatively unshocking, relatively sedate activities like just taking a boat for a little while and giving it back. But every part of it has got this kind of excitement and enthusiasm, which maybe tells us something about the meaning of what Wordsworth is trying to get at. So I'm going to focus in on that little phrase, I unloosed her chain, this early action that's so important. And to think a bit more about it, I'm going to talk about those three words, chain, her and unloosed, but sort of in backwards order, because I feel like maybe that's just the way we need to think about it. Now, if we've been reading London, then we might already want to make a connection with some of the things people have been experiencing. So when we look at that chain, we might think it's a bit like manacles. It's a bit like that kind of imprisonment that Blake saw in the people of London. So Wordsworth is perhaps approaching this boat and seeing it as something that's tied up, in chains, contained, and he's got a job in kind of making that boat a bit more free. So this is some object that's kind of imprisoned until he comes along. Now, it's interesting, isn't it, that although this is an object, he describes it as her. It's her. So it's very clearly a gendered word. You know, we've got this young boy, Wordsworth. Maybe he's at a stage of life where he'd be excited to start meeting members of the opposite sex. It's interesting, at this same moment, he meets this boat who is apparently a girl or a woman. And it might just suggest to us it's gendered as a woman or a girl. It might just suggest to us that Wordsworth is perhaps trying to apply some kind of masculine control. It's not just neutral. I'll put a question mark there because it might be something we think about. When he sees this boat, he's thinking about masculine control, about being a man, about taking control of this object in the same way that perhaps a man at this period might take control of a woman's life as well. And maybe at this point in the poem, we might think that he's looking for some kind of harmonious connection as well. Maybe in untying, loosening, he might be looking for some kind of harmonious, peaceful, pleasant connection between himself and this boat that he's encountered. Moving back to the final word there that I think is so interesting, is that unloosed. So he's clearly taking a decision about things. He's taking control. Making a decision, taking a decision, and doing that all for himself. And maybe that's an expression of growing up as well, is when you can be a little bit more independent and do things for yourself, and with that experience some kind of freedom. Which is an important theme of this poem. The Prelude as a whole is a young person experiencing freedom of nature for the first time. But we can see already he's doing that freedom while setting himself up as perhaps some kind of controlling presence of this boat, of this situation. He's trying to take control even while he's trying to be free. So he unlooses the chain. He gets into the boat and has a bit of a row along. And as he's rowing, what he says is, "I fixed my view upon the summit of a craggy ridge." I fixed my view. So he looked straight up at it. He could see it in the distance, but his eyesight was on that mountain top, or that hilltop. So he's eagerly, enthusiastically, determinedly moving towards that place, going in that direction. And we can see that simply from a word like fixed. I'm going to draw a long arrow so we get it underneath the quotation there. That word fixed, perhaps suggests that he's really committed to finding it, to getting to it, to owning it, to possessing it, just like he's possessed the boat. And if we're talking about that kind of desire, that kind of want, we've got a word to describe that from our vocabulary, haven't we? And that is yearning. Yearning to possess it, just like he has possessed this boat that he's rowing around in now. When we're talking about ideas like freedom and imagination, we're really talking about very intangible ideas. We're talking about stuff that's going on inside people's heads most of the time. But we're now in the presence of something that is definitely not intangible. It's something that's very, very tangible. This summit. And I think this is a great illustration of something that's tangible. If you were confused about that word, what could be more tangible than a mountain in the distance? So while he's experiencing these imaginative transformations and growing up, part of that is experiencing nature as something tangible that he can get a grip on. And to take it back to his desire for control, yearning for control, something that's tangible, perhaps we could say it's possible to conquer that thing. You can, you can reach it, you can find it, you can conquer it. It can become yours. But maybe I'd also add, just as a little note, on that craggy ridge, it's not a smooth mountaintop, it's a craggy ridge. So it's got all kinds of edges and outcrops, and maybe there's a little bit of danger there as well, as if you were climbing up this craggy ridge. You might actually find that you were in trouble. So I might just put one word to go with that. And I might just say that's threatening. Even at this stage, he's excited about getting to this tangible thing of the mountain, but it's threatening. There's a little bit of danger there. And it's just worth remembering that when we come back to the end of the poem in next lesson. So, I'm going to move on, but that's where we are now. He's rowing in his boat, looking at the mountain, committed, maybe trying to conquer this tangible thing, but also acknowledging a kind of excitement at the threat that mountain poses. So finally, to give one more example of how he's got that enthusiasm, he's having a great experience, I'm just going to select those two little lines where he talks about rowing. And he says, lustily I dipped my oars into the silent lake. Lustily I dipped my oars into the silent lake. And when I read that out, the word that first leaps out at me is silent. Because when we've got something that's silent, that perhaps gives us an illustration for one of our key words today, which is submissive. It might be peaceful as well. But if you're submissive and peaceful, maybe you're coming under the control, that masculine control that we talked about at the start of the poem. But if another word pops out for me, it's that word lustily, this adverb. And let's just put that adverb up there so we know what's going on. And of course, that's maybe not a word we use an awful lot these days, and maybe not an adverb we used a lot, but you might be familiar with the word lust. So for a quick definition, we'll just say lust is maybe like a kind of yearning, but you might already realise that if you're talking about lust, you're probably starting to talk about something sexual. You can lust after owning things, you can lust after a new phone, sort of, but if you're talking about lust for someone, it means you'd feel quite strong sexual feelings towards them. So it's an interesting moment that, yeah, he's eager and excited. I'm going to put that in a slightly different direction just to show it's maybe a slightly different thought. That he's eager and enthusiastic, but there's also this sexual or sensual component to that experience that maybe links to this phase of his life where he's growing up, experiencing people and objects in imagination that might mark the way he's growing as a teenager, and he's experiencing this in the same way he might experience the delight of meeting someone of the opposite sex and giving them a kiss or something more. I wouldn't like to say. But clearly we've got this sort of opposition where we get this control coming in, and that's the kind of key word for our lesson, isn't it? About control. That we're getting this kind of control of a man over a woman, which is perhaps the same as being the kind of control that this man wants to have over nature. So he's enjoying nature, he's enjoying the freedom, but he wants to have control and a conquest over this whole experience in the same way that he might encounter in a personal relationship in the world. So those are the three quotations I'm going to leave you with, and we'll put up those on the PowerPoint in a minute so you can copy them down. But there's lots more to talk about, but those will be a great starting point for us to work with.